So that generates that. We then say, what initiatives are we going to do? And we resource those separately. And then anything else that isn't covered by the first two, overheads. Because together, they form the complete budget. Now you'll probably work out, you can actually do this. It's quite a simple thing to do. I was actually working with an organisation last year in London, and they want to move to this. However, this is a big change for them. So I said to them, look, why don't you for next year just do business as usual, but why don't you carve out, I think it was 10 million they were going to carve out, just to spend on initiatives. And we keep it separate, and let people bid for it. In fact, this is something that the Rolls-Royce cars do. I was at a presentation with their CFO. He said, what we do, we have a pot of money, anybody in the organisation can bid for it. However, they have to say, how does this benefit the organisation? How does it improve the drivers of our business? And if those initiatives get chosen, that person gets the budget, is also then paid, not on implementing the initiative, but on obtaining the outcome he said that they were going to obtain. Really quite interesting, but it's a way of getting into this kind of thinking. Lastly, I'm going to skip that. Lastly then, is actually the processes. Now when you look at performance management, you'll see, the textbooks will say, there is a thing called strategic planning, tactical planning, financial planning, forecasting, budgeting, and risk management. 6 nice boxes. What a load of rubbish that is as well. Let's have a look at what really goes on inside an organisation. Now, I do believe that those processes exist, but they consist of a collection of activities. So here, for example, if I'm going to do strategic planning, it's about analysing what the current performance of the company is, what our strengths and weaknesses are. It's about analysing what the marketplace is going to do over the next few months or years, and then saying, okay, what position do we think we can take in that new market? And how are we going to achieve that position? What objectives are we going to set ourselves? And what kind of strategic themes are we going to do, like we're going to let's say, expand into a new product area or into a new territory? That's what I call strategic planning. Once we have that, we then see, okay, we've got these strategic themes, but what are the initiatives? How do we actually make this plan a reality? What are the activities that we're going to do that's different from business as usual to do that? And then what are those activities going to cost us? What are the resources? We're then going to assess those activities in combinations of initiatives, because we can't do it all. Once we have that, we're going to have a plan. I'm sorry, it's a bit hard to see there. But we then say, let's have a contingency plan. If this plan doesn't work, what else are we going to do? Let me just tell you, the thing that separates a high-performing company from an average company is that the high-performing companies have contingency plans. They don't just do one plan. They have a range of plans. So that if something goes wrong, they already know what they're going to do. Once we have that, we now need to assign resources to business as usual, which is budgeting. We then kick off the projects. We then need to forecast. What is sales really going to be like? What are costs really going to be like? What about the initiative status? How will we know if they're being implemented and so on? And then we're going to, from management reporting, we need to load in actuals and do reports and so on. So there's a whole series of activities here, and of course, depending on what happens in any of those activities, you'll probably want to branch back to one of them. Now, let me ask you a question. Out of that series of activities, which one can you drop? I think we've all gone to sleep. I'm coming to an end.
That was a difficult question.
It's a difficult question. Which one are we going to drop? Shall we drop develop initiatives? Let's not do that. Well, that means strategy will never become a reality. Because if it hasn't got resources, it will never happen. If you don't assign people resources, it will never happen. Okay, so we can't drop that one. Let's drop the forecast. Okay, if that happens, we've set ourselves a plan, but we actually don't know whether those initiatives are working and whether we should stop doing them. The thing is this, you can't separate this. It's all part of one process. And this is the reason why when we developed CorPeuM, we said, you know what, we've got to do the lot. Because you can't separate it. When it comes to strategy management, you can't separate it. It's all part of the same process. So we had to make sure we developed functionality and we developed data holding capabilities to capture all of this in one model. Because guess what? Everything impacts everything. You can't split it up. Now, so in terms of budgeting, by the way, budgeting is a fundamental part of strategy execution. You can't disconnect it. If you do disconnect it, it turns into a numbers guessing game, which is what many organisations have today. Okay, so how often should this process take place? For example, today, this is typically done annually. This is typically done annually as well. Budgeting annually, forecasting maybe quarterly, reporting maybe monthly. How often should this be done? As necessary. You're absolutely right. It's a continuous process. I've got a budget for my home life. I have plans about retiring. Fat chance that's going to happen. Right? But I've got plans. I always want to buy new motorbikes. And you know, if something happens during the year, I don't wait till Christmas before I re-budget my life. I change the plan. Make sure I get those new motorbikes sooner rather than later. Yeah, it's a continuous process. So why do we do anything different inside an organisation? Look at this quote. I love this quote. It's the best quote I've ever read. I'll read it out. Dakota tribal wisdom says that when you discover you're on a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. Of course, there are other strategies. You can change riders. You can get a committee to study the dead horse. You can benchmark how other companies ride dead horses. You can declare that it's cheaper to feed a dead horse. You can harness several dead horses together. But after you've tried all these things, you're still going to have to dismount. Fantastic, isn't it? And that's why high-performing companies do this on a continuous basis. It's not just triggered by a date on the calendar. It's September. Oh, let's budget. No, it's triggered by events. Now, within this, these activities in themselves actually have a number of sub-activities that go on. And that's why when we built CorPeuM, it had to have process management built into it. And that process management had to be triggered by dates on the calendar as well as by events and exceptions in order to generate a continuous planning process. In some ways, this is really what ERP did for the general ledger and stock control world, was it 10, 15 years ago. They introduced the concept of process management. And I believe this is long overdue in planning and budgeting. And because of the pace and the complexity of the business world, that's why we really have to go towards a process workflow view of planning and budgeting, so that we can automatically. You can't do this through menus. It has to be something. You have to tell a user, okay, something's come up, we need you to plan, or we need you to reforecast this. Depending on what they do, we then need to tell someone else, look, someone's just reforecast sales. You need to get your marketing budget in line now. When they've done that, the support services need to get theirs in line. And there's a whole network. You can't control that through menus. It has to be a process. The system has to come and tell the user, I found this is what you need to do. To make it simple for them. Okay, I'm coming to the end now. You know, when we set out to design CorPeuM, here are some of the things that we wanted the system to do at a high level. We wanted to make sure that people could evaluate and choose the best initiatives to hit strategic goals. We had to make sure the system would ensure that adequate resources were assigned to both business as usual as well as strategic initiatives. We had to be able to monitor the implementation of those initiatives so we can say to a user, do you know what? That plan that you had isn't being done. You need to take action. Something needs to happen. Or it's not working. You need to ditch that initiative and perhaps come up with something else. Don't wait for the end of the year. Let's do it now. Get off that dead horse now. And so on. And the way I tend to look at CPM, I look at it like a car. Okay, so here's a car driving down the road. The business model is actually the engine that makes the car go forwards. That determines how it's going to operate. The strategy is the roadmap of where we want to take the car in a future position. The resources are the fuel by which the organisation keeps moving forward, and the processes are the steering mechanisms by which we make corrections and changes and so on.
But what is the driver actually changed? But how is the driver changed?
How is the driver changed?
Yeah, because it has an enormous influence on, say, the organizational culture, maybe ability.
Absolutely. I believe this is a big culture change. And that's why you can't do this in one go. It's a step-by-step process. In fact, I've been working with one company in the UK, and we're 4 years into it, and we're gradually changing the culture. You're right, it's a huge culture. That's why these projects have to be driven by the CEO and CFO. I was in ComShare when we made this change. We'd just done that budget, which we missed 2 months in, and the CEO said, this was a waste of time, we're never going to do that again. We did, of course. But we started a dialogue and a conversation of how we were going to change the culture. And by that culture was about making people responsible for activities that generated organisational value, not the budget. I think paying people on the budget is probably the worst thing you can do. Because what you get during budget time is people trying to maximise their pay packets. It's the wrong behaviour that we generate. So, what I'm saying as I come to an end, I believe there's something called the CPM system that has all these components, and of course, what I've just described is CorPeuM. CorPeuM has all those capabilities in that product, and one of the things that we do as an organisation is that we like to work with partners to really help organisations. How do you make that cultural change? How do you start to shift it? Because you're not going to do it overnight. It is a gradual change process. But we have a technology solution that fully supports this underneath. When it comes to other applications, there around this central system will be a range of BI applications that give you insight into particular aspects of how we generate value or where the marketplace is going. So this doesn't replace BI systems, it works in conjunction with them. Because these systems are actually analysing a little bit more detail. However, from that information, we may need to change the strategy. We may need to focus on some different areas. And then management reporting is about how we grab that information and present it in context. And I think on one of the slides I've got here, I've given you a range of reports and views of how you can change that context. I'm not going to, there's a whole series of things. What CorPeuM does is gives you answers to a whole range of different questions, such as how are we doing? Are the activities being implemented? Are they having an impact on strategic goals? Now, it's possible to take CorPeuM and still set up a crap budgeting process inside it. However, what we try and do in organization, we try and say, look, let's see if we can work with you to change the way that we do things, because the system has enough capabilities within that. So, if you like what I said, there's a white paper called the CPM framework, which I think everyone's got a copy. There should be enough for everybody. If there's not, we can send you one in the post. By the way, we've got a blog on our website, on the CorPeuM website. There's a blog, and again, we've got various thought leaders to write articles for us, which is really good stuff. David Aexis, great guy, great insight into the way organisations, how high-performing organisations differ from the average organisation. And I had to write a book if anyone's interested. Okay. Any questions? You want to see the software now. Say, get rid of those introductions. Let's see the software. So that I'm going to hand over to Frank. Frank, all you've got to do is follow that.
That's right.
Thanks.
Thank you.